February 18th, Prime Minister and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong will deliver the Singapore Budget 2025. This budget is expected to address the rising cost of living, concerns about job security, healthcare, and housing, issues that are perhaps staples in every budget announcement. But the rapidly changing economic and geopolitical landscape might just provide some surprises. As the last budget of the current administration, or if you prefer, Lawrence Wong's first budget as PM, Singaporeans are also expecting an SG60 budget filled with, shall we say, cheerful goodies. Will that be the case? We ask the experts. Joining us for this conversation are Nicholas Fang, Senior Advisor, the Asia Group and Managing Director, Black Dot, and Dr. Mathew Mathews, Head of Institute of Policy Studies Social Lab, NUS. I'm Claressa Monteiro. My co-host is Howie Lim. This is Lens on Singapore.
Welcome, Mathew. Welcome, Nick. I want to start with Mathew, though. As Claressa mentioned, last budget of the current administration, or PM Wong as Finance Minister, as Prime Minister now's first budget. How important is it to make that kind of distinction? Does it make a difference even?
Well, I think many Singaporeans will kind of look at this as the last budget of this current administration, and it's typical that we'd expect that whatever surpluses which have been accumulated, and that's been the practice, that it gets redistributed in some kind of vouchers or additional incentives to Singaporeans, and of course being SG60 year. But I think there is something to be said about the fact that this is PM Wong's first budget as both Prime Minister and as well as Finance Minister, because this is about not just about charting what the government is thinking, has been doing its longer term plans, but also as now the leader of the government, and a government which is hoping to be re-elected in the next term, to be able to set forth and think about this as also something which would prepare the ground for the elections to come.
If you had to put a theme to it, this year's budget, what do you think it might be? Maybe I'll ask Nick this.
So I think my concern would be that we don't look at it as purely an election budget where goodies, cheerful or otherwise, get rolled out basically to make the electorate happy. The budgets are very important in Singapore as a signal of the government's priorities, and also as a delivery method to make sure that a range of different issues are addressed, from the social side to the economic side and beyond as well. So I think when we look at the budget in 2024, which was the theme, building our shared future together, I suspect it would probably be something along those lines as well. This idea of co-creation, the idea of working together and building some kind of unity within the country would probably be one of the themes.
I concur with what Nicholas was mentioning about. I think there are two words that stand out: is the word future and the word together. I think that you can't run away from the idea that this is SG60 as well, and we really have to provide, and I think the government wants to provide confidence to Singaporeans that they have been able to think about Singapore in the long term, particularly with all the geopolitical changes which are happening, increasing concerns on many, many fronts. Disruption is very, very clear to many Singaporeans. So, and of course, there are always questions at how a little small nation can deal with all these uncertainties. So certainly the idea about giving Singaporeans a confidence about the future. So I expect that budget to have that, and also the idea about that togetherness, right? It's this idea that increasingly we need to see the corporate world becoming very much part of solutions that we need for society. And I think that will probably be amplified. The enablers to be able to do that will come out in this budget.
PM Wong has had a lot of engagements, and he has been speaking directly to a lot of Singaporeans, both business and individuals. And he has said he recognizes cost of living looms large for most of us Singaporeans. What do you think is in the basket in the budget this year? Is it going to be a focus on longer-term policy reform and remodeling, or will it be immediate relief, cash incentives?
I would say that you cannot run away from the fact that many Singaporeans are expecting that there will be some kind of cash incentives. Certainly, the fact is that I think for the average Singaporean, cost of living, it continues to,
it impacts us all.
Yeah, it impacts all of us. Generally, it's still not affordable for many people, many things, and people would expect the government to continue to help to make it affordable for normal life. So whether it's when you go to the coffee shop, the hawker center, price for dining out, the typical kind of things that people are concerned about are well taken care of.
The bread and butter
bread and
things.
butter kind of things. Many of the other long-term kind of concerns, healthcare costs continue becoming affordable, education costs becoming affordable. So many of those things will also be important, and I think people want to see some plan towards that.
Might be challenging to include all of everyone, I suppose. Do you think they might focus on for whom? The young, the older maybe? How about SMEs?
Yeah. So I think one thing important to note is that our budgets are never developed in isolation. They're usually based on multi-year plans. And we've been lucky enough to have that kind of stability in our country where we can take a longer view when it comes to developing policy as expressed in the budget. So even though we look at the here and now in terms of the challenges facing businesses, individuals, households, it's important to always remind ourselves that there's a long-term plan and you can't just chop and change on an annual basis. So on the issue of costs, I think rather than saying which demographic we're looking at, I think we also cannot forget that we want to maintain competitiveness as a global hub. So I do think we'll see measures that address that along with anything that addresses cost of living, CDC vouchers, SNCC rebates, USAVE and things like that. I think we'll see continuation and potentially extension of some of those or maybe increases. But I hope that we also don't slip into a position where we become very populist, where we give out things and people develop the expectations that we should have goodies every time a milestone budget comes around. Shows like this are very important to make sure people get a sense that we are looking at Singapore as a whole, the future in the next 12 months, but hopefully in the next 12 years and beyond as well.
Okay, before I ask my next question, what you said, my brain's going, quick question, do you think they'll raise taxes this year?
I think they have not announced it. They have already announced the staggered GST increases. And I think if we were to put on a slightly cynical view and talk about the upcoming election, I think potentially is a message that will be hard to take. So I'm going to put my neck out and say most likely not. I don't know if Mathew, you agree.
I don't think so. I mean, apart from perhaps...
We hope not, lah.
Yeah, particular segments. I know there have been talk about the fact that property taxes for foreign owners, for instance, maybe is there a way to increase it? Is it helpful? I mean, I don't know. So there might be, if there is any kind of raise, it might be very, very targeted. And it probably not affect the bulk of Singaporeans.
Okay, like for me, particularly personal to me, is the issue of Singapore's aging society and the rising cost of healthcare. I put these things together and I want to ask Mathew, do you see a focus on healthcare spending in the budget and what that focus will be in relation to the fact we have an aging population?
There have been a lot of efforts with Healthier SG. It's really about ensuring that the population is prepared for, to live healthy for a lot longer, and which also, of course, will have that knock-on effect of allowing people to be productive for a lot longer, not having to be cared for in that sense for a lot longer. And I think that is really a winning proposition if many more Singaporeans can live longer but healthy. So I think a lot of the effort, and this has been something that's been ongoing, making sure that people do get the work of getting themselves healthy much earlier, right? I mean, you have to, your 40s, 50s, really kind of put in a lot of effort towards that, for instance, home care, ensuring that we have many of the other, the infrastructure we need to provide the kind of long-term services within the community. I think that will be a focus, and that might be some things which would involve quite a bit of budget.
Yeah, and to a certain extent also, I feel that it shouldn't always or only be government provision of services. When it comes to healthcare and this issue of longevity, people, lifespans going up, how do you ensure that their health spans keep pace with their lifespans? There's a lot of personal responsibility that has to go into it as well. And at the same time, I think from the corporate sector, there's a lot of things that can come into play to really look at how can people live not just longer, but better lives as we go along as well. But it tends to be a whole of society kind of thing. I think government can take responsibility for provision of services and health care, and maybe topping up MediSave, for example. But a lot of it lies in our own personal responsibilities to take care of ourselves as well. So the budget would be a good place again to start signaling that it's important for people to start looking at these things.
Financial well-being as well, right? And as you mentioned, for example, CPF for the over 55s has undergone some changes as well. And you also mentioned corporates and businesses. So what about for them? Because as they have to as well look at all of these social policy enhancements in terms of how they treat their labor force. And AI is forefront as well. So Nick.
So from a business point of view, those you basically highlighted the key challenges and potentially the key opportunities that businesses will be looking at. I think if we come back to the fact that this is the first budget for PM Lawrence Wong to present as PM, I found it very interesting in his National Day rally last year that there was quite significant emphasis on mental health. So I do think that these are things that will have some airtime in the budget. There might be some measures to allow companies to provide certain programs that allow not just staff to improve themselves, but to take care of themselves as well in terms of their own self-care. So I think these will be very progressive indications of, again, this social compact that we see, not just between people and the government, but people in the workplace and with their employers as well. On the other issues that potentially I would call it maybe slightly intangible stuff, like focus on sustainability and the environment. But Singapore, as part of their green plan to have a green economy, I think will still carry on this vein.
You know, I think that one of the things that leads from that whole question of green and environment that impacts both socially and economically is transport, mobility. Whether you talk about people who are very wealthy and trying to decide if they want that third luxury car, or someone just, not really happy with the rises in public cost of transport. It is at the forefront of everybody's mind, transport, mobility. What do you think's in the budget, from a social point of view, to assist people in the lower end of that spectrum to keep being mobile, despite the whole, the environment, the EVs, the whatever?
I think there's always been that concerted effort to ensure mobility, especially for those who are seniors and those who are lower income. I can't think whether there would be any special provisions in this budget.
If I can put in a plug for a wish that I have
You
on a wish list,
wouldn't you?
I've always believed that Singapore has a huge potential to be a real cycling nation. We talk about...
That's because you like cycling.
I
Not
do.
all of us feel that way.
I do like cycling.
So
But if you think about the Scandic, the Nordic nations, the countries and cities in those places that have really strong cycling culture, they don't have as good situations or circumstances that we have, right? Our distances are relatively short as far as a cycling going, population would face. Our weather is not terrible. We don't have winters. We don't have snow, sleet,
But it
hail.
is warm.
It is warm. So an idea I had a long time ago was, rather than just encouraging people to cycle more, ostensibly you might have to create facilities to allow them to either park their bikes, grab showers, have lockers to put their stuff, and it's just repurposing some of the parking space, for example. Every person on a bike, if you imagine the space that they take up, and if they were a driver, the space that they would then have in a car, the trade-off is quite clear. And if people cycle more, healthcare potentially might go down as well. So I think it's a bit of it's a tricky issue because it's a chicken and egg. Do you wait for the culture to develop and then look at infrastructure like bike lanes and bike paths and things like that? We have a great PCN system already developed. But it's also just a mindset change that might need to happen. Again, I don't expect this to be a feature in the budget this year. If it is, I'll be very happy.
Personal interest,
but
right?
potentially you could, the congestion and also the benefits to health. I think that's something we could think about.
Suddenly very clear what Nick wants on his wish
I know,
list
right?
for
More
the
sports.
budget.
I don't know about the greater population. Just sitting here, you have three people going,
I'm sure you all can cycle.
If I could
right?
try and fit it into my next question, then do you think the infrastructure will come up, or you're hoping it will be in the budget for, say, businesses to be supported in converting their fleets to EV vehicles?
Yeah, I think so. The drive towards EV is very clear. I think a lot of us, myself as a driver included, are waiting for the charging infrastructure to catch up. But anecdotally, just talking to friends and colleagues who do drive EVs, it's pretty good already. You know, most places you can find somewhere within a certain vicinity to charge if you don't have something at home. But just looking at the place where I'm staying now, our car parks don't have EV chargers, not a single one. So I think we're still seeing a little bit of time needed for the infrastructure to catch up pace ahead of the mandated, last day that we can drive petrol cars.
We also want to talk about global competitiveness. I think, Nick, you brought it up earlier on. President Trump is going to walk back on some of those climate goals set by the previous administration. So how do you think that's going to impact Singapore, though?
I think if we look at it, we in a very clear-eyed sort of way, we know that the positions within the US tend to change with administrations. We saw one flip when President Trump was in the White House for the first time. We saw a second flip when President Biden took over, and now we see a flip again. So I think the world is getting used to the idea that these things can and will change with administrations. And the rest of us basically have to sort of hold the line and keep pushing forward. I think some of the concerns are obviously in terms of how businesses and the green economy might function when a major power like the US reverses course and changes policy in such a drastic way. But that kind of corporate responsibility and global responsibility for everyone to do their part, I think will persist. And my hope is that other countries see the opportunity to step up and say, right, if the US is going to do this, it's fine, but we all maybe have to do a little bit more to do our parts. Players like China, for example, will have a major impact.
I want to move to mid-career workers. In the last few years, I would say that mid-career workers were probably a little bit more impacted than they had been prior to COVID. They're looking at staying relevant. They're looking at pivoting to other industries. What do you think in this budget is going to be there to support these mid-careers, these individuals? And it could very well be someone like me. Mathew.
Well, PM Wong mentioned some of this in the last NDR when he talked about trying to empower mid-career workers and their retraining efforts. We do know that retraining is not very easy. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's, you just go for a course and you get something, but really dealing with all the other things that you have to deal with, whether it's being part of the sandwich generation and we're going to take care of the elderly, younger children, or school-going children. People don't have the time to do that and continue fully, attentive to their current jobs. So giving that space for them to be able to train with the government providing help for them or supplementing their wage for that season, I think that's an important part, and hopefully we can hear more details about that.
And they've got to double down on that. And the reason I ask is you brought up a very, very important point. If I am in training, if I'm upskilling, I also have probably, as a mid-careers, a mortgage, a car payment, children to feed, elderly to be worried about. I can't not be working unless I lose my job. And if I lose my job, I do need assistance to provide for all of these responsibilities and upskill. So do you think there's going to be more in this budget to support people specifically in that situation?
Well, to one, I think there's always going to have to be some personal responsibility. People have to make that choice to say, I want to ensure that I will be able to have a comfortable living standard and make sure that I'll continue to remain employed. So they'll have to make some calculations there to say, hey, the mortgage will have to wait. I'll have to make sure I take that 6 months to finish off this vital training, which I would need to be able to pivot to another career. So making sure that people have that space and for the government to take care of some of their wages during that season. And of course, hoping that now companies will be able to give people the kind of break they need or time off, which might be quite difficult because if we're talking about a substantial portion and then still holding your job might not be so easy, and it'll take a lot of work on companies. But nonetheless, if that's possible and the government helps to sustain or at least make sure you have a decent wage during that period of time, I think that will put people into that place where they're a lot more willing to be retrained and to make sure that they catch all the needed skills. Really, what we have in Singapore is a good, labor force, and to build on that is extremely important. And that message has to come out so clear to people, especially in their mid-career days.
Speaking of personal responsibility, one might argue, or some argue, that having a family is personal responsibility. Don't be sticking your nose into telling me to have more children and so on. But from a pragmatic point of view, economic point of view, we understand the need to expand the population and such. So, Mathew, do you think there'll be more support schemes and grants to encourage Singaporeans to have more children?
You're right. The fact is, it's really people's personal choice when it comes to having children, and there's only so much that incentives will be able to help that. But the truth of the matter is that many young Singaporeans say they want to have children, but state that cost of living is their greatest consideration. Sure. And it's not just cost of living today, but what they see as potentially costs, which will be very high for their children. They worry about whether their children will be able to get their place or be able to have a decent education. So based on all those costs, I think there needs to be some kind of assurance for Singaporeans. So I do think it would involve quite a few things changing beyond just incentives. So I think budgets would definitely deal with the fact that you want to provide some amount of incentives to be able to help people to know that the government is clearly on that direction of wanting to make sure that you're able to be supported through this parenting journey, but yet at the same time, enough help for businesses so that they can curate some of the way they work, which becomes a lot more family friendly.
What would businesses need?
Yeah, so I was going to add on to that. I think that there are the levers, the very practical levers you can pull on the issue of businesses, whether it's allowing or creating incentives for Singaporeans to consider starting families, the paternal childcare leave that was announced last year. I think measures like that have been quite well received, but it's also a broader issue about the culture, I think, in the country, right? Do you have a livable city, or do you have a livable and lovable city where people think about other things beyond earning a paycheck, dealing with the cost of living? Do they have enough time to breathe, enough activities, sports, arts, culture to say that, wow, I really like life and I would like to, bring new life into the world, and this would not be a bad place. So I fully agree, with Mathew's point that there's a lot of considerations that go into it, and the budget can only take us so far. But when it comes to the personal responsibility part, I think what a lot of Singaporeans who are thinking about either upskilling or retraining or shifting careers, what they could do with is some help in mapping out a transition like that. It's not so simple to say, just go and upskill and jumping on the catchphrase of the day, which Howie, you mentioned earlier, we didn't really get into it, but this notion of AI. Is AI really the next frontier? I think a little bit of question.
Is it the big disruptor? I think a lot of people want to know.
It is, and which direction is it going in? Which aspect of AI should we be going in? A few years ago, it was everybody had to get into coding and you had to know Python. And now with ChatGPT, you don't need to learn how to code. You need to learn how to write prompts that get the AI to do the work for you. So, what is the right direction to go? And if I jump into something and it takes 6 months, and after 6 months, oh, sorry, it changed direction. Now it's actually this thing. So, encouraging some kind of strategy development, these kind of career coaches or life coaches, but not so much about finding fulfillment in life, but helping people in the transition to the new skills that they might need or new career path that they might select. I think that would be as important, if not more so, than giving the financial incentives that encourage people to do it, whether it's $4,000 in your skills future or whatever, or that encourage employers to allow people to go and do this retraining and reskilling. I find that that's going to be quite interesting because I don't know. I don't have the answers what the next hot industry and career should be the choice for people who are thinking of making the switch.
I just have one more question for both of you gentlemen, jumping off from what Nick said. In the last budget, which is, if you look at it, they started to talk about support for those displaced from jobs, falling short of saying we're going to have unemployment benefits. Could we see unemployment benefits?
Well, I don't put it past the government not to discuss unemployment benefits because it is something that many Singaporeans are concerned about, particularly with the disruptions that you expect in the economy and the labor force, but in what form it will take, right? And so far, I think it's very, very clear it has to be a period and you transit into training, for instance, to be able to equip yourself back to the next job. So it's never this idea that you would just have some kind of benefit or this.
And I think it's critical because what we touched on a bit earlier was this notion of remaining competitive globally. And Singapore, I know it's a bit of a trope, but we have no natural resources. The only asset we have is our workforce, is our people, our systems. And if you have a population that becomes used to the idea that if I do nothing, I'll still have support, that takes away a big selling point that we have, which is a very driven, very focused, hungry workforce. You need to reassure people. You need to give people confidence. You need to, address all the challenges, the uncertainty that we see in the world. But you don't want to cross the line into complacency and then people slipping out of being really driven and motivated.
Sure sounds like the upcoming budget is going to be a real balancing act. We've got immediate issues like the cost of living and job security that are clearly top of mind for many Singaporeans. Then there's the need to invest for the future in areas like sustainability, AI, and making sure the workforce has the right skills, all while making sure that no one gets left behind. I'm Howie Lim.
And I'm Claressa Monteiro. Thank you, Nicholas Fang and Dr. Mathew Mathews. This was Lens on Singapore. Thank you for listening.